Um, when I first came out in the 70s, it was this decade of sexuality, and everybody was having sex with everybody and everything. And where there was a thing called, and gay people were starting to find their voice. Like back in the 60s, or during the times when all the black people were starting to demonstrate, gay people were starting to demonstrate, the world was changing and people were starting to find their voice. But gay people, being who they were, like myself, were very confused because of how heterosexuality had been, how heterosexual propaganda made us feel not included, and that they expected certain behaviors from us because we were looked at as not men, not women, but something in between. So I was getting caught up in this behavioral kind of situation with all my friends, acting like Diana Ross was a big thing. We all did Diana Ross. I did a drag show once. We'll get into that later on too. And it was all a lot of fun, but I didn't realize how it was affecting my community and myself at the time. And one of the things we did was called wrecking people. And there was a diner in New Jersey. And when we would go into this diner after being at the gay bar, we would carry on like a bunch of wild women. I mean, like crazy gay people, screeching and exactly what the people expected gay people to act like. So this was my life, and I was becoming more and more entrenched in it and looking forward to it because it was a lot of fun. And these people were hysterical. We were laughing constantly. Little did I know we were laughing at ourselves. Nevertheless, I want to tell you how all of this behavior changed when I met the man that I fell in love with. And I spent 50 years with him. These same friends all went up to a hotel in Pennsylvania. And I was walking into the lobby of the hotel, and I had never been there before. And as I passed the couch, I saw two men sitting on the couch. One of them was Stephen, and the other one was his friend Mitchell, a lifelong friend of Stephen. As I walked in, I was walking with my effeminate friend Bobby. I'm sorry, I have to laugh because he was just so funny. Anyway, I'm walking in with Bobby, and he's swishing in like a girl. And I saw Steve on the couch, and I turned to Bobby and I said, "Bobby, I don't know how I know this, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life with that man on the couch." And he looks at Steve and he says, may the best man win. I said, "Honey, at least I'm a man." So we laughed and went into the hotel. So now it's that night and everybody's dancing and disco dancing, and his friend Mitchell comes over and asks me to dance. Sure, I'll dance with you. So we danced maybe 2 or 3 dances, and we go back out to the lobby. And it's maybe 2:30 in the morning. Stephen walks over to us and says, "Mitchell, I'm going upstairs. I'm tired." And Mitchell thought it was funny we were both named Steve, and in his inimitable voice says, "Steve, this is Steve," and walked away. Now I'm staring at Steve. He's looking at me, and I'm saying, "I didn't introduce myself. I've never seen this man before in my life. I know I'm going to spend the rest of my life with him. How is this now happening that he's standing in front of me? This is kismet." So we started talking. "What's your name?" "Steve." "Steve, ha ha ha. Where you from?" He lived in Brooklyn. I lived in Manhattan. So we went into a little library off the lobby. And we just started talking and having a lot of fun and relating with each other. And all of a sudden we turn and we see people in the lobby with bags, and we come to find out it's 11:30 in the morning. We had no concept of time. We were in awe of how the time flew. We decided to meet there the next week. We met there the next week, and that connection became even stronger. We basically fell in love in the library, and we would meet there every week for 3 weeks. And then it was becoming inconvenient, and Stephen would start coming to my house in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And he would spend the weekend, and we were so connected that we would tell people we were going away for the weekend and not answer the phones because we just wanted to be together. And I can't explain this feeling. I knew my life was with this man. And I felt he felt the same way right from the beginning. So he would start staying at my house Mondays, then Mondays and Tuesday, then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, to the point where every time we had to separate for a day or two, we would start crying as we would have to leave each other because we couldn't stand being apart. But this brought up some other issues in my family because they knew I was gay. They didn't know I was gay. They knew I had been married, and now they were convinced I was a straight guy. But all of my friends were gay men. One of them included a transsexual named Yvonne, who was what we call our beard. If we had to go to a wedding or a bar mitzvah or some kind of family gathering, well, you would take Yvonne because Yvonne was a transsexual who wasn't finished, but she was a very convincing woman to the point where she lived with a woman in an apartment for 3 years. It was a one-bedroom apartment. She shared a bed with this woman, not sexually. They slept in the same bed, and this woman had no idea Yvonne was a man. That's how convincing Yvonne was. My father met Yvonne. Very funny story. So now my father is starting to question what's going on here because Stephen and I were connected at the hip. I wouldn't go anywhere if he wouldn't go. He wouldn't go anywhere if I wouldn't go. So my father is starting to ask questions. So he says to me, what is this with Steve? What is this guy? Who's this guy, Steve? What, are you married? And I don't know where I had the chutzpah, but I said, we kind of are, Dad. And he looks at me and he says, why can't you meet more friends like Yvonne? I said, you liked Yvonne? I said, well, Yvonne got the same thing in her pants you have in yours. I thought he would faint. Then I said, I know what you had on your mind. I'm going to tell Mommy. So it was a joke. Anyway, so now I told him, he's asking about Steve. And he just doesn't understand. And I said, Dad, I said, I don't understand your problem with this. I said, you're the first person to help anybody. You've lived a wonderful life. You're a loving person. But yet you're having trouble with this. I said, both of your sons are gay. I said, I would suspect that you're having trouble with this because you're gay yourself and you think we inherited this from you. His reaction was, of course, volatile. And he said, I love your mother. And I said, I love my mother too. I said, but if you understood your own sexuality, you would understand I have no choice in this. This is what makes me right with the world. And you're my father. You had me not to live your life, but to live mine. You should be proud. You showed me how to love people, how to be successful, how to be independent, how to be a good person. You taught me all of those things. I said, but you also taught me to be who I am, to be honest with who I am, and to live a genuine life. And that's what I'm doing. You should be proud of me. Well, my father, at that point, fearing I thought he was a homosexual, called me the next day and said, I'm very happy you met Steve. But he didn't mean it. And I basically lost my family. I saw them my whole life. We had a relationship, but they never felt the same. And they never accepted Stephen. They even verbalized to me that they felt Stephen was a Svengali in my life and turned me into this 50 years later. So nevertheless, there was always an estrangement with my family. But now Stephen's family is my family now as well. So, like I said, Stephen would come to my house Mondays, then Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And then finally, he says, you're coming to my mother's house for dinner on such and such a night. Okay, so I go to Brooklyn, to his mother's house. I had already met his mother. Quick sideline. Stephen, when I first met him, was having his nose fixed. I don't know why he was so handsome, but nevertheless, he was having his nose fixed. And his family were quite well off, and he was at a private hospital in Manhattan that was in Old Brownstone. I was going to lunch to visit him, and I saw a woman standing outside the hospital, And I thought, that's Stephen's mother. I didn't know how I knew everybody in Steve's family before I met them. So I walked up to her and I said, aren't you Mrs. Brown? She goes, yes, and who are you? I said, I'm Stephen's friend, Stephen. She said, oh, I've heard Stephen has mentioned you. She said, well, I'm just going upstairs. So we both went upstairs and visited with Stephen. So now I'm going to Stephen's mother's house for dinner. So we go for dinner, and Stephen calls me into his room, and he had a large chest and a steamer trunk. So he's putting things in the steamer trunk. And I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm moving into your house tonight. I was like, oh, good. And I thought everybody knew that this was planned. So we're getting ready to leave. And I go into his room with him, and we start taking the steamer trunk out. And he says to his mother, oh, Mom, Dad, I'm moving in with Steve. Oh, okay. So he moved in with me, and they had no idea. But everything seemed to be fine. So Stephen's mother, we would go shopping. We would go antique shopping, Steve and I. We would go butterfly hunting. We spent every weekend in the car driving upstate New York, going to thrift shops, going to flea markets. And Stephen had wonderful taste. And there's a reason for that. I'll go into that another time. So he would buy beautiful things, and it would cost nothing. So we were very involved, and we started looking at houses that we could afford, because we really couldn't afford anything. But we were trying to see if we could maybe buy a house and fix it up. And we were up in Nyack, New York, which is an antique center in New York. And we had made friends with two antique dealers, Bob and Margaret, and we would sometimes spend their weekends there, and they would go away for the weekend, and we'd watch the shop. So it was just delightful. So now we found a house up there, and it was a house built in the beginning of the 1800s, and it had never been fixed. But it was a huge, 20-room house, and we would have to pitch a tent in the ballroom to live in it. So Stephen's mother would come with us sometimes, and she would sit in the back. Stephen would be in the passenger seat, and I would be driving. So now we were together. Maybe Stephen was living with me maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and his mother was in the car with us. So we're driving upstate, and we show her the property that we were thinking of buying. It was very cheap, and so Steve said to his mom at one point, Ma, you think you and Dad could help me and Steve with a down payment on this? We'd like to buy it. So I'm driving, and I could see her face in the rearview mirror. And she says, yes, but what if one of you gets married? You don't know the future. And I look at Stephen like, all right, what are you going to do now? So he's saying, well, Ma, I don't think that's going to happen. We're very good friends. And so he finally says, like I said to my father, Mom, we kind of are married. And I look at her face, and I see this expression of extreme surprise, the eyes wide and the shoulders up. And oh my God, I said, what is she going to say? She looks in the rearview mirror at me. This is 1972. And she says, from now on, you call me Mom, and you call his father Dad. This is 1972. My parents cried for 50 years. This is two people that accepted me as a family member immediately. It was what I knew Jewish people to do. I'm saying that because it's part of why I became so Jewish in my life and my outlook with Stephen, because I ended up seeing how different that culture was. So I became part of Stephen's family. And to this day, I have nieces and nephews that are my great-nephews from Stephen's family. And as the 77-year-old, I am the last one alive and have become the family historian for the Brown family. It's very fascinating. And all the nieces and nephews have seen me, they've grown up knowing me as Uncle Stevie. So I've been in their family their whole life, and that's how they see me. My family, everybody's dead. Everybody passed away. It amazes me. I have one cousin left, and we get along. We always did. But my family never accepted me, even my gay brother, because of his own inability to feel have self-pride. I always felt there was a bit of jealousy because I found Stephen so easily. Stephen was, in the gay world, a very wanted commodity because he was so handsome. He looked like Mark Spitz. If Mark Spitz and Freddie Mercury could have a baby, he was very dark and swarthy and handsome. So my brother could never sustain a relationship, and here I was in a relationship for many years, living in palatial houses and penthouses and 28-room mansions that we couldn't afford, but we somehow got by because Stephen knew what he was doing. Viewing my video. I look forward to telling you more about my life. Thank you.